You're very welcome to the collaboration of Confident Women Ireland, Confident Men Ireland, and the Irish Political Roundup. With me, Roisin the Cleric.
And me, Paul Brophy. And the purpose and intention of this event is to highlight and try shine a light and tackle the stigma that is mental health across our society. So we're delighted, Roisin, to be joined by Paidi Manning. Paidi, who is no stranger to our viewers who would have watched our election counts over the last 2 years. Paidi, his analysis was brilliant in the local and general elections last year in 2024. Paidi is a well-spoken advocate around mental health, and we're also delighted to be joined by Martin Gillick, who has over 30 years' experience working in the field of mental health. Martin is a Defence Force veteran and has worked on health and well-being, particularly employee and mental health well-being projects with the Defence Forces and Bus Éireann. And you're a lead instructor in St. John's Hospital as well, in the area of mental health first aid.
But yes, I was originally managed the program over there in St. John of God's, and yes, so I suppose I'm one of their senior instructors. So I won't say that I'm the best one, but I'm one of their senior instructors.
So we're delighted to have both Paidi and Martin here today with us to have this really important discussion, Roisin, which is about mental health.
Yes, and so we'll start off, it'll be a casual conversation talking about mental health and talking about, Paidi, your experience of your mental health journey, and, as well as maintaining good mental health, and maybe just start the conversation of getting it out there, as Paul said, and taking away the stigma of mental health issues here in Ireland, and especially with men. We women talk, but men tend not to talk as much, and they just smile and nod and have that no. But women talk, that's one thing we're good at, is Maureen Lipton used to say it's good to talk.
Yeah.
But no. So, Paidi, would you like to just share your journey? Because it's very inspiring. I first heard your journey about your mental health. I hate that word journey, but your life experience of mental health. I first heard that when Paul did an event for you back in 2019, was it?
2017.
2017.
Yeah.
And so it was really inspiring. So it's really good to have you back with us, because it's a story that, and I think with you being a young guy in your mid-30s, you can relate to an awful lot of people who are going through any kind of low moods. If anybody has a low mood, how do they know it's a low mood, or if it's depression or anxiety? And actually, they'll start talking about it and how they can maintain their mental health. So we start off with you. Would you like to sort of tell the audience out there about your experiences?
First of all, I can't believe it's 8 years since that event.
Yeah,
It's like 2017.
Yeah.
My God. I suppose my mental health journey, for lack of a better word on my part, I was a very unhappy teenager. I was a very lonely teenager. I was chronically underperforming in school. I didn't have the attention span. I was actually diagnosed with ADHD at 18, which explains my absolute inability to study in school. Fell behind to the point where I couldn't catch up. I was of the opinion that I was going to fail my exam, and I was I was suspended for 2 weeks in 6th year, just shy of late April of my leaving cert. A month later, I'll be sitting in exams. Tore up the letter in front of everyone at the school gates. I was acting the big man that was showing off. Then I got lift home as far as the gates of the farm, and I walked up and I wrote a suicide note next to my trailer with rope. Was strongly contemplating suicide. I was actually interrupted by a family member who drove down to the farm off her way. I didn't realise I was in the shed. Flip off. And eventually I just had to give up and go home. would have been a few more incidents like that over the years. I tried to overdose in college. Later on in life, I would have been walking over the bridge in Thomastown, contemplating jumping. So I suppose I started speaking about it when I started working for a training company. They had a managing self-harm training course. And I was learning a bit about self-harm, and I realised I had self-harm as a teenager. I might have punched the door, punched the wall out of frustration, turned smiley faces onto my hand, just to distract from the emotional pain I would use physical pain. And it worked for a few seconds, the immediate seconds. And so I wrote a brief blog about self-harm, my experience of self-harm, my misconceptions of self-harm before I started doing these training courses. I posted it on Facebook and I got very positive feedback. There was no stigma, no embarrassment. And that was a stepping stone to speaking about mental health and suicide. I would have spoken about my own experiences of suicide ideation or suicide or working like one of those. And the feedback from that blew me out of the water. All positive, no negativity, no embarrassment, no stigma again. Stigma didn't exist, there was none. It was actually the opposite. People contacted me. There are dozens. I would hazard a guess over 3 digits, which to me is a lot of people. To say they would have experienced something similar, they felt the same way at one point or another, or a family member of them. I mean, every aspect, every corner of Ireland, every aspect of my life, family, friends, school friends, work colleagues, relatives, you name it, strangers. Got to the point where the more I posted, the more people contacted. People would contact my mother, not even contact her, but they would bump into her and start talking about it. I saw what your son posted, you know, and that it was actually the engagement from other people pushed me to keep talking. Where today, I suppose.
Before we leave it out to the panel, just as a mother, I was thinking, what age did you start realising? Did it start off with low moods? Did it start off then becoming more chronic with depression? So can you remember what age was it negative thoughts? Was it low self-esteem? No, I'm not asking for the story behind it.
It was a combination, I'd say. Like I wouldn't have had any friends. Again, it was
loneliness.
Loneliness was a massive factor in my emotional state at the time. I was undiagnosed with autism until 20, so my social skills were over.
So, what age did you start to feel that loneliness? What age? Because leaving cert would be like 18, wouldn't it?
Yes. First year of secondary school on, I had no friends. I was on my own for all those years. But I had a cousin here or there, they acted like they were family, very close to my cousins. But beyond that, I had nobody. So I suppose, from 15, 16 onwards, I would have felt to the point where it got progressively worse. Around age 18, 19, coupled with underachieving in school. That all came to a head, really. Point where I wanted to die.
Did you feel an awful lot of pressure in school that you weren't achieving, that you weren't getting the grades, that the teachers were just looking for high grade students? And
I can remember word for word, verbatim, because it's etched into my mind. An English teacher of mine once saying, lads, if you fail the leaving cert, your lives are over. Yeah, I was in fifth year at the time. And I believed it. So when I was suspended a month before the leaving cert, I was like, this is it. Fuck it, I mean, like, I'm done. I'm finished. There's nothing more I can do. Screw it all. That was a massive, massive part of that reaction that day. I have no hope. I lost hope. And yeah, I thought suicide was the only option available to me.
And Paidi, you know, and from listening to you there, you know what? I'm sure Roisin would share the same. I know thousands of other people are so delighted that that person disturbed you on that day, because
I am myself.
yeah, absolutely, because
Um,
had he not, wouldn't have been here to tell the story.
I had that realization very shortly after, because I was in sixth year. That was 2008. And that was in, we say that was in April. My uncle got married in June. My uncle Jerry, who
Yeah.
I idolise. He's my hero growing up. You know, he's
Your favourite uncle.
one of my favorite uncles. Yeah, but he's one of my favorite. He's probably one of my favorite people. He got married in June, and I was sitting in a church watching this amazing human walking up or waiting for his wife, standing up there, right? And next man I had the realization. I was sitting in the chair, and I was like, "Holy shit! Like, I could have missed this.
Yeah.
Like, I would not be here for this. The chair would be empty." In the church, while this is all happening, while he's getting married, I was like, "Fuck!"
Yeah.
Like, I nearly killed myself. I wouldn't be here. Like, what would it be like without me here?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a very scary thought.
Did you talk to anybody at that stage? Like,
No.
did you even? Because I hear an awful lot of people, mothers saying, "I didn't know my son was thinking or feeling that way. He showed no signs." Or my daughter, no signs.
I suppose I showed signs, but I did not have the words. I did not have the vocabulary or the ability to even get the words out of my mouth. I could not bring myself to be vulnerable at that time in my life.
It's interesting that you speak about that piece, Roisin and Paidi, just in relation to signs. And I suppose, do we recognise? And you bring me back to, I was doing a course in UL at the time, and we had a young lady on the course, very good looking, but in the last couple of weeks before she completed a suicide. She took her own life. She stopped wearing makeup. And it was only in hindsight that we actually recognised that piece there about, and you just talk, and it just came back to me there in relation to it. And I suppose that sense of, who do we open up to? Who do we tell, what's going on for us here? Or who do we feel safe telling? And I suppose you talk about not having the words. Would there have been a piece around that it was very much also, who do I trust here? Who can I tell what's going on for me? Maybe Matt?
So long ago, I feel like a different person now.
Yeah.
I remember I wrote a piece 10 years on. So when I was at my suicidal point, I took a photo. Because I was in the middle of a project, taking a photo every day, which died out when I was chronically depressed. I just didn't have not the willpower, I didn't have the energy to maintain it. But like, there was one day I just looked like death. And 10 years on, I found that photo and I was like, I look so sad. And I took a photo 10 years on and I posted. I was like, I wanted to kill myself then and Feedback was thousands. And I was asked to write a letter to my younger self. So I did, but what the very first line in the letter was, dear 19-year-old self, thank you for not killing me. I'm so very glad you didn't kill me. Because he could have. I could have. But yeah, I'm very grateful.
Even those few lines there, that initial part of the letter, powerful. And yeah, absolutely. And
The chap, the boy, the kid who was going through all that emotional anguish, I don't know him anymore. That's not me. My life has changed. I'm recognizable. My life is 10 times, 50 times, 100 times better than it was.
Yeah.
When I was that suicidal.
And if you were to, I suppose, speak to the audience here from the perspective of what little steps, what may be the first step that somebody might make if they're because they're feeling that down, they can't see any hope, they can't see any way forward. What might be the first step that they might make?
I'm of the opinion that, and I've heard people say before, suicide is selfish, but until you're in that situation where your mind is in self-destruct mode, your mind is trying to end your life. Your mind is lying to you. My mind was lying to me. I would say to anyone in that situation that the thoughts you're feeling, you're being lied to. Your depressed, suicidal mind is trying to hurt you. And is trying to get you to hurt yourself. I would say contact the doctor. As far as I'm concerned, what I went through, what you're going through, it's a health issue. It's no different from if you have a sore leg or a broken arm. Go to your GP. Can't get the words out verbally, write it down in a hand them a piece of paper. And maybe, hopefully, what you're going through can be eased or rectified. I mean, you've nothing to lose by going to a GP. You've everything to lose by not going to a GP. And you've everything to lose by killing yourself. You have nothing to lose. Everything to gain. Speaking to somebody.
And Paidi, at that time, did you feel not only, I would say, suicidal, but did you feel that you were in a sense of pain, and it's not that you wanted to take your own life, it was you just wanted the pain to go away? So do you think that?
No, I wanted to end my life. And I'm sure it was because of the pain I was in, the loneliness I was in, but I was so unhappy with my life. I was so deeply unhappy with how I was feeling, how lonely I was, how upset I was. I wanted to die. That was, my brain was telling me I wanted to die.
And what were the first steps that you took that you felt that started to make the difference, that started to change the circumstance that you were in at that time?
I suppose it was really the opening up, and this didn't happen it was probably 2013, so 2009, 2012, bit of a blur, bit of a riot, maybe in 2008 onwards. It was when I started writing about how I was feeling.
Yeah.
And posting it and not caring what people thought. When I started writing about how I was feeling, that was the turning point. Started and opening up, because I couldn't. To this day, I am absolutely brutal at speaking verbally. I can write I can write a page, 2 page, 4 page, 5 pages about how I'm feeling, but speaking, I'm not fairly comfortable.
Well, from today and other events, Roisin, including the count, we could definitely say that you're well able to speak Paidi. So, but
Yeah,
I
so
suppose
essentially, the turning point was opening up. My method of opening up
yeah,
was writing.
and Roisin, you're a life coach as well. Journaling is, that can be a real powerful tool, and Martin as well.
Yeah, very
From
much
your
so.
from your own experience as well, you being able to write
Yeah,
something down
I
can make a
find
difference.
Paul, and what you're saying there, and what Paudie was saying about that sense of putting it down on paper, that's therapeutic in itself. It takes it from here and puts it down there, so it means it's not always up there anymore. And I find something as simple as, what do you got? I have a heavy day ahead of me tomorrow. I'm finding it difficult to sleep tonight. What I'll do is say, okay, what do I need to do first thing in the morning? Keep a notepad beside the bed, and I put down a few little notes here. And once I put them down there, they're gone out of here. It means it makes, hopefully, I'll have a much more restful night. Now, if you're doing stuff like that on a regular basis, or you're putting your thoughts on paper, what it does, it breaks the jumble that sometimes goes on in the head. And where we're, all of a sudden we get into that almost that negative stream in many respects. So I would totally agree. Journaling is can be a key tool. Some people are better than others at it. I have a diary. Don't write in it every day or even every week. It could, there could go a couple of weeks before I actually put something down. But again, I find it useful. I find it therapeutic in itself. But it's that sense of actually what we do to mind ourselves. In other words, and what's your own self-care routine?
I suppose this all plays into the thing as well, self-care and resilience, because they do go hand in hand.
Yeah, very much so. And I suppose that sense of, when we talk about building resilience, I think Paudie spoke about it earlier on. He spoke about it from the point of view of thinking back to the leaving cert and the words of a certain English teacher.
Oh, I'm very fond of it. I really.
Yeah, but what the effects of something, your life is over, And by the way, I had a crap leaving cert, so what I got. But I went on. I went back to education later on, and that sort of stuff. So what I would say is, there's many different routes that we can take in life, from that perspective. So I suppose what I'm trying to say to you there was that sense of being aware that actually, what do you know what? We don't always achieve success, but we can take learning from what we've done there. If we use the word fail, FAIL. Anyone know what the other? Yeah.
Is it first attempt in learning?
Absolutely, it's first attempt in learning. So in other words, that sense of actually saying, you know what, didn't get it this time round. Something as simple as, if I was to ask, hands up here, who got their driving test the first time round, or who didn't, but it didn't stop you. You went at it, most likely went at it again. So there's even simple little things like that. That sense of, I suppose, that building that resilience is we learn from what we've done. We reflect on and maybe say, actually, do you know what? I need to try this again, but I might need a slightly different approach in relation to it.
Exactly. And even if we take sport, for example, St. Mirren sacked Alex Ferguson many, many years ago, and look what he went on to achieve. So it just goes to show that one setback, like that, doesn't mean it's the end of the world. And I suppose you think about your teacher, he came out and said a statement like that. It just goes to show, teachers, they can play a massive role. So I think you need to be more. I think most teachers, I would be of the opinion, are aware of that. But
I think
teachers, they do have an important role to play, especially with young people.
Well, this was nearly 20 years ago now. I think teachers are more aware of the mental health implications of such a statement.
Yeah.
I think there are better training.
And I suppose if you go back 20 years or a lot longer for me, if that's the case. But what I would say on that one there is that, look, we've evolved, we've changed in our outlook, the way we, there's less rigidity.
And that was only a flippant throwaway comment from her.
Yeah.
I'm sure she'd been horrified if I'd said.
Yeah.
So like, it was a flippant statement that I took to heart.
Yeah, and sometimes what can happen is I think we can do that. Somebody may say something or do something, and all of a sudden the belief system kicks in. Actually, this is directly at me, where it may not necessarily be the case in relation to that. But Paidi, if I was to ask you just from the point of view of your own self-care, in other words, what have you got in your self-care toolbox that gets you out of the bed in the morning? What motivates you to?
Well, I like to eat, so I need to pay my bills. I have no choice but to get up.
Yeah.
Food is massive. I'm a foodie, so I'll often treat myself to a Chinese or an Indian or a scrambled eggs and sausages down in the Pembroke Hotel on a Saturday or Sunday. Yeah, my order revolves around food, so I kind of.
So food is the key one there.
Yes,
yeah.
That's nice dinner or good dinner. But again, everyone's different.
Yeah. And would there be anything else that you'd keep in your in your toolbox there that you might occasionally dip in or dip out of?
Amy there was Rachel sitting there behind the camera, but you have a crap day in work, something goes wrong. Go to 4-star hotel. Yeah, you need someone to talk to, and like if something goes wrong, I can.
Yeah.
Chat to Amy.
And to have that soul, very much that soulmate is so important, or that the small group that, are your support circle.
Yeah. You need people. You need to be able to vent.
Yeah.
Get stuff off your chest. You need people you trust for that.
I'm curious. You had the attempt of suicidal, the thought of the suicidal thoughts, and the actual action of going down to the farm and the trailer and the rope. And that was pure loneliness, and also academically, at that sense of failure of not being academic, and that's academic success for young children at that stage. It is a child. When you look back now, 18 is still, you're a child. You were a baby.
Yeah.
You were still your mommy's baby, no matter what age. So
she might still say
that. You're still her right baby. When was the turning point of ending that sense of inner loneliness as well as loneliness of having no friends? And when did that change? Because you're very popular.
Hmm.
So that's my
point. Who you ask. I suppose when I started to make friends when I went to college. In college, I think I went into the PLC course, and I made friends there, and then I went into the workplace where I made the majority of my friends through work over the years. I suppose it was, post-secondary school I probably started to make friends and become less lonely. The long and short of it.
Because you are such a great person to be around. I remember when we did the first count, and Paul was nervous, and I anticipated us all. It was our first time to do something.
Yes.
And it was like, and I was sitting on the porch that my son Killen made for me, porch, and it was a nice summer's day, sunny day, and I said, and I don't know where your name came out of, Paidi and Paul, and Paul was the day before a bag of nerves.
Oh,
you'll be grand. Paidi will be there.
yeah.
Paidi will be there. And you came and you changed the dynamics. You didn't know that at the time, but you changed the dynamics of Paul that morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And afterwards, I think it's kind of the thing. you know, a lot of the things we worry about, they don't actually come to happen, you know. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've started to learn and deal with, you know. It's when you get into that excessive panic or tizzy and stuff like that, you know, just take a step back and, you know, try look at it logically, because I can get myself worked up. And I'll be honest and put my hand up about that. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, it was an inspired idea, Roisin. There's no doubt about
Where it came from.
yeah, it was
Intuition.
yeah,
Human intuition
yeah,
put it
yeah.
down to that. But so getting back to, I'm really curious about self-care
Yeah.
in that. And so there must have been things that you, was it that light bulb moment you were in the church or the wedding ceremony and you saw your favorite person, your favorite uncle, and he was waiting for his bride to walk up the aisle, and you said, you thank God, you know, that you didn't do that. So did that change your because everything's about mindset? Did you change the way that you viewed yourself in the world that you live in, and did you change your own perception of you, who you are?
I remember that happening, and I couldn't really make sense until I went to a mental health talk in the National House in Dublin a year or 2 years, 3 years later, and there was Barbara Brennan from CJ Ireland, and she mentioned the empty chair concept or phenomenon, and that's when I had the realization that's what happened to me in the church that day. In terms of how I would view myself and see myself, yeah, like a chronic low self-esteem when I was younger as well. So like my self-esteem has risen to a degree already, as has my confidence and like my resilience. I couldn't have been any less confident or have any poor self-esteem than I did. Non-existent. So shy, so awkward. I wanted friends, I wanted to fit in. Desperately poor, I wasn't. Yeah, I suppose when I started to get friends, I wasn't the loner or the losers, but I wasn't the loser that I was back then, or how I viewed myself back then. Hope that answers your question.
That self-care that you talk about, Martin.
Yeah, I think, you know, sometimes we forget that actually self-care takes work. It takes effort on our behalf. And if you look at society in general, do we really look after ourselves? You know, we're constantly rushing around. We're, you know, we mightn't even fuel the body before we leave the house in the morning.
Yeah.
You know, the simple little things like, look, do I get up in the morning? Do I have a breakfast? Do I start my day off in the right frame? So something as simple as that. I give myself enough time that I'm not rushing. So in other words, straight away my anxiety levels are not up. What do I do? Do I take a break in the middle of the day? Do I have that lunch break? And it's interesting, a friend of mine who, believe it or not, is actually a carpenter, and he would say, "No, too busy, can't take a break." And I said to him, "Look, I want you to try it for a week. Take 40 minutes at some stage between 12 and 3 in the day." And he took the 40 minutes. And he'd stop and he'd have his cup of tea and he'd have his few sandwiches and the whole lot. And I'd read the paper, and I said, "Don't answer any work calls or anything." So he said the first 2 days, he says, it was extremely difficult to do it. But he says, I got into a routine. And he says, I was actually more productive when I went back in the afternoon. So straight away, even that recharge there in relation to it. And I think it's that sense of actually, what do I need to do every day to keep myself well? Many of us, do you channel surf at night? I don't anymore. I have a specific time that I go to bed. When's the last time I checked my phone? You know, whether it's Twitter or it's I did Facebook or it's TikTok or whatever. You know, they don't really need to be checked. But you know, Or, for example, do I leave my phone off to one side rather than carrying it around with me the whole time when I'm at home in the evening time? The other thing I'd say to you there is that sense of having a regular, almost kind of a regular routine. You might break that routine at the weekends, needless to say.
Yeah.
And that we're also talking about, how am I fueling my body? What am I putting in? And the old saying, good gut health is good mental health. So again, what do you got? Am I eating? What do you got? Eating reasonably well. Still can enjoy my curry. Still can enjoy my Chinese. I can, you can still have those pieces there. And then what I would say to you there is that, have you got a well-being toolbox? And the toolbox can be simple things. For example, I drove down this evening, and what do you got? Instead of putting on the news channels, put on a playlist.
Yeah.
And even just that, something as simple as having a playlist that you might listen to. It might be a specific set of books, or if you're into poetry, there might be poetry you read. So it's about finding what works for you and what you'd include in your toolbox, but also remembering that you don't have to use these every single day, but there may be other things you can do occasionally that support your well-being. For example, I'm meeting friends on Friday that I haven't seen in 2 months. So again, we're having a breakfast meeting. So again, very much that sense of just getting together, shooting the breeze, and finding out what's happening in other people's lives as well. So that connection with people can be so important.
Yeah.
So again, there's just some very simple examples of what we can do that can help, I suppose, sustain and maintain our overall sense of well-being.
And an awful lot of people, they don't understand that sometimes changing, as you said, you suggested to your friend who's a carpenter, to change his routine. That's creating a new behaviour habit.
Absolutely.
And in that, it can take up to 6 weeks to 2 months to change that behaviour pattern. And where it becomes a change of behaviour that becomes a routine. And sticking at it, and being that resilient, staying at it, to see how it works, and giving it that time. And I always would say to people, is the self-care that I use as well. And I talk about mindset all the time. And I say, first of all, in that internal dialogue, how are we speaking to ourselves? What are the words, the language and vocabulary that we speak to ourselves? And when, we can be our worst enemy, and we don't need enemies. We can be our own in a prison in our own mind. And the tone of voice that we speak to ourselves in. We don't need anybody else to shout at us or speak harshly at us, because we are speaking so harshly at ourselves, and that judgmentalness in the tone and harshness of our tone. And if we're sort of negative and everything else, our voice and our tempo speaks up. And that harsh tone. So I would always say, the first thing in the morning, and that happened when I was doing my NLP training. My colleague, my fellow student said, okay, I do a thing was, what was your first thoughts in the morning? Well, I was a mother, divorced, parenting alone of a 10-year-old and a 16-year-old, 14, 16-year-old. And I went, oh my God, even come here today? I had a strategy A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And he says, tell me about them. And he says, oh my God, after I got to about D, he said, oh, I'm exhausted before we even get out of bed in the morning. But that was all my whole thought pattern. The moment I woke up, within the first 2 or 3 minutes, okay, what if this goes wrong? What if that goes wrong? That was just for me to get to my NLP training course. And that was about 5 o'clock in the morning before I drove up to Maynooth to do that. But I always say to somebody, what is your first thoughts in the morning? You mentioned it in the morning, and you asked Paidi, what did he do in the morning? And I say to everybody to change that negative thinking, that negative self-talk, the negative language. And then I go, practice on yourself. When you start off first thing in the morning, and maybe check in, because if you're changing the behavior pattern and the habits and the routine, and I would say then is check in first thing in the morning, and then stop yourself if you're having those negative self-sabotaging thoughts, and change the thoughts and the words, the vocabulary, the language, the tone of voice, the speed at what you speak to yourself. And then check in every couple of hours because it's a change of behavior. You can't do it every hour on the hour because that becomes anxious and you get so anxious about doing it. And then I would say check in at lunchtime when you're having your break. Okay. Then maybe around 3 o'clock and then before you go to bed at night. It's changing that behavior and listening to the tone of voice, listening how we speak to ourselves. And then you are in the present moment with yourself. There's so much out there that everybody with mental health, they're rushing, they're always trying to be fast, get somewhere faster. Because would you say that there is an you're trying to fill that avoidance of actually being yourself and having that connectiveness with yourself, never mind with someone else.
Roisin, I totally agree on that. And what I'd say to you there as well, even just to consider, I think most of us can be affected by anxiety. It could be, actually, do you know what? I have to stand up in front of a group of people. I have to speak here with 3 other people. So again, it doesn't matter what the situation is itself there. But sometimes we forget something as simple as breathing. And a simple breathing exercise can almost bring, help to dampen down maybe those particular anxieties. Paul, you mentioned earlier on about that sense of actually that catastrophization.
Yeah.
Oh, the worst is going to happen. I'm going to walk in here now and I'm going to make an absolute hames of it, or I'm going to be late and people are going to give out to me, and all the usual things that that almost kind of those negative thoughts as we spoke about earlier on. And again, that sense of actually thinking to yourself, actually, in this situation, what can I control?
Yeah.
So, for example, a simple example: you're driving down the road, and you're a few minutes late, and there's 2 tractors with big hay bale trailers on the back of them chugging up the road here, and saying, "Oh no, I can't be having this." You're not going to be able to change the fact that the tractors are there.
No.
What you can change is we can change our reaction. Something as simple as, do you know what? I might have to ring ahead now and say, "Look, I'm stuck in a bit of heavy traffic. I'm going to be a few minutes late," rather than us more or less ruminating. We're getting more anxious. Physically, with the body's tightening up, the heart's racing, the whole lot, and everything else. So again, simple little things like this that, firstly, allow the breathing to kick in. So a simple little box breathing exercise. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4, and repeat the process. Now, if you're driving a car, make sure you keep your eyes open when you're doing this.
Absolutely, yeah.
But other than that, what I would say is, look, that can be the starting point. Also, sometimes we can find that, in certain situations that, I can't connect. The mind has gone blank, or the mind is a jumble.
Yeah.
And what I find useful from that perspective there is something as simple as a grounding exercise. And again, now you can start at 5 things you can see and work right down to 1. I normally say to people, I just look for 3 things or 4 things you can see, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can you can smell, and something you can taste. So it's not using all the 5 senses, but at least what you're doing there is you're bringing yourself back into the present moment. And if we're thinking about that, we're not thinking about what's creating maybe the anxiety for us. So in other words, you're reducing that effect there. So it can be something as simple as that can be actually quite helpful in relation to it.
Now it's like that connecting in to see what changes your emotional state.
Yeah.
And that awareness, okay. And that's something that I learned was music changes my emotional state. Moving, walking, going out for a walk, even if I'm in a really bad mood, just putting on my coat, and even in the rain, going out for a walk. So movement, because in that movement, the body we are designed as human beings for movement.
Yeah.
And music, I put on Tina Turner, ABBA, and Cher, like all the 80s music.
Classics.
But also you talk about the breathing. I remember I was on radio and I tell everybody this, and I love being in the background, and so anyway, I ended up being. I just wanted to produce, but I created 2 radio formats, and I realized that I'm creative. I may not be a great writer because I'm dyslexic. Now I park that issue of that self-limiting belief because I'm dyslexic, I can't write. And a very good friend of mine, when I was back at college, like you, went back to college and education later in life. And my friend in America, and Vicky, I met her in Saudi when I was 11, and she's like a second mother to me. And I said, what am I going to do with this? I'm dyslexic. And she said, when you have something of value to say, people will listen. I go, well, I've got nothing of value to say. And she just let me rattle on. She said, remember this. She's passed now. And so a lot of what we're doing now is about giving people a platform of people who have something of value to say. And with breathing, getting back to my point of breathing, I was on a radio program. I know exactly who I was talking to. It was October 2019. And I was interviewing someone on the phone. And like that breath work, I always breathe really fast and really shallow. And I was sort of practicing what I preach and being in the present moment, not thinking about the past, not thinking about the future, what could go wrong, or limiting beliefs of the past or anything. And I remember in that moment on the phone call, hearing my voice. There was no clutter, no internal dialogue. I heard my voice talking through the mic and through the earphones and talking and hearing my breathing. It was nice and slow. I felt my body. It sounds really airy-fairy, and I would have dismissed people, even though I was a life coach and an NLP. I would have said, I can't do that. But it was amazing that I was live on air and I had that experience. Now I know when I'm in the present moment, I hear my voice. I feel my voice. And for me, I think that is a wonderful. Anyone who is stressed, living with severe chronic negative, self-sabotaging self-talk. And because every word, a lot of people don't understand or they're not aware of, every word has a chemical biological reaction at every cell level in our body. And has a frequency, it has a vibration, and it has an energy. Even the word, people say, really, if you say to someone, I'll try and do that, well, that's a negative word in itself. And you go, I'll try and do that. You're already telling yourself, well, I'm setting myself up to fail. Whereas you say, I'm going to give that a go. We'll see how it happens and see how I get on. Changing the language and I talk about an awful lot about how I have an issue with everybody says, oh, use positive affirmations, use positive thinking. And I go, well, positive thinking, I could say, and I had an issue with the book, The Secret, as a life coach as well. The secret was, go out and buy that BMW, the money will come, you can manifest it. And I went, well, that's not real. You have to have a job, you have to be able to pay that, otherwise you're going to lose. And it was at that where I really started to think about the language, positive thinking, affirmations. And that's where I developed my own positive, I know it's out there, but for me it worked. Putting positive words with action. So that is what I call proactive. The pro-action, the action. I always say positive affirmations and words, it's just word salad without action. When you give yourself that commitment to the positive affirmations with the positive self-talk, is nothing unless you put it into action. And as you said, it changes the whole physiology within the body. And I think that's powerful for me with the mindset and knowing. I think over the years, I don't know whether you would all agree with me, but have we as a society with media, and I know my degrees in media and public relations, I'm a coach, and have we as a society, have we become so disconnected with ourselves and that loneliness that everybody wants an instant Instagram lifestyle. Everybody has to look good, feel good. And, oh, how are you today? I'm great. I'm wonderful. Never better. How we become so disconnected with ourselves that we're not listening to our own self-talk, and we don't even know ourselves anymore. You're deep in thought there, Paul.
I don't know the answer. That's that. Yeah, I think a lot of people live their life through a lens now. They can post on Instagram,
Yeah.
Facebook, but yeah, it's an interesting one, but I don't think I have the answer to it.
Yeah, I think there's probably a whole study here in relation to I suppose the effect that we'll say, for example, the use of the mobile phone, social media, the whole lot, the positives as well as the negatives. And what I often notice, and actually I'd ask our viewers to even think about this the next time they're out. You're out for a bite to eat, you're gone for a coffee. Look around. See how many people are engaging, they're connecting physically, verbally with each other. And then how many of them are on these guys sitting opposite each other, and they're on the phone. I know personally, if I did it out with my better half, I won't tell you where the phone would end up, but it wouldn't be a nice place. But that sense, sometimes does that feed into where I don't have the answer, but does it feed into that sense of loneliness, that sense of disconnection that sometimes can happen out there, and that sense of maybe expectations that we have about what's real and what's not actually real. And sometimes I think the social media world isn't as real as a lot of people might think it actually is. And you made the key point there about, just go out and get it. The bills will be paid at a later stage. Not necessarily. No. That's absolutely not the case. But I think it's that sense of, when's the last time we actually connected with ourselves? And you mentioned that sense of, that being kind to yourself. When's the last time you gave yourself a slap on the back? Said, you know what? I'm under it all. I'm not a bad old sort. I do quite well. I've been relatively successful. And everyone, you mentioned about value for people and that sense of value. Everyone has value, no matter who they are. But I think what we can do is we can enhance the value of those around us by encouragement, by support, by being there. Something as simple as being the listening ear. We talk about that sense of, connecting with people, that sense of empathy, that sense of, and sometimes say, what exactly do you mean by feckin' empathy?
I don't know about you, but in my opinion, it's become a very overused word.
It has. But again, I think people maybe misunderstand what it is, and what I would say to you there is, I believe that sense of being able to connect with someone, to understand non-judgmentally, without judging what's going on for someone, or just being there with a person. That's empathy. That's that sense. And I think empathy drives connection. It drives that sense of, actually, do you know what? I'm here with you. I can help you walk this road.
You don't even need to talk.
I don't even need to talk. I don't even need to have a solution. I just need to be there. And
an awful lot of people, they think, oh, they have to show empathy. Whereas if someone is talking to them, they don't listen. They go, oh, I can empathize with that. And then they start getting into their own story instead of being there. And
being there for the person.
And I think that connectedness is about really, you talk about self-care. An awful lot of people think nowadays self-care is about going and getting the nails done, the eyebrows done. That's not self-care. Self-care is about looking after your mental, emotional, and physical health.
Absolutely.
In every sense of the word. And so, you talked about signs earlier on, about the visual signs of someone. If someone is watching this and they know someone who is going, that they're not the person they care about, they don't know how to start that conversation was, are you okay? And they go, oh yeah, I'm fine. But you know that if they're a woman, she's not wearing her makeup, she's not wearing clean clothes, she's the hair's not being washed. For a woman, for a man, it might be he's not changing his clothes, he's not having a shower, he's not shaving. If he used to shave every morning, and even like the eyes, the eyes, they're not smiling, the facial expressions. But from your experience and your expertise, how would someone who wants to help and wants to be there, how would they start that conversation?
I think it's, realistically, the simple things there would be, firstly, what I would say, and I'm going to repeat this: location. Firstly, finding the right time and space to initially engage with the person themselves there. So in other words, we're not going to do, if it's a work, we're not going to do it in a crowded office, canteen, whatever. Even in the home, it might be that actually trying to find a quiet space where you can initially open that conversation. How do I normally open the conversation? Normally open with, look, how are things going for you? What's the usual answer I get? Like, they're grand, they're fine. Yeah, everything. I hear what you're saying. Yeah, but how are things really going? And you might get that kind of, what are you asking that question for? Well, do you know what? I've noticed you haven't been yourself the past couple of days, past couple of weeks. You might be told to feck off, mind your own business, as has happened. And normally what I would say to someone would be, look, I hear what you're saying, but if you want to talk, I'm here. And I'd be a little bit tenacious without being rude. I'd go back at it again. Maybe not that day again, but gradually that sense of just, and what you're letting somebody know is, firstly, I've noticed. I noticed you haven't been yourself, and I'm here for you. Do you have to have the answers? No, absolutely not. What I would say is, if you open the conversation, reflect back what you're saying about the person. Look, I noticed, you haven't been very talkative lately. You look as if you've lost an awful lot of weight there, and you look very tired in yourself. Has anything happened in the past couple of weeks that you'd like to tell me about? So even as simple as asking the questions there, you don't have to go into a huge amount of detail. And what I would say to you there is that, if somebody more or less discloses to you that they haven't been feeling well, they've been very down, what I would suggest in that case there is that basically you signpost. So there might be signposting, as Paidi mentioned earlier on, to the GP. If you genuinely believe that somebody may be suicidal, really what we would say is ask the question. Sometimes when people are feeling the way you're feeling or thinking the way you're thinking, people think about suicide. Have you been thinking about suicide? What's the worst that can happen if you ask that question? The worst thing that can happen is that that somebody will actually tell you, who the hell do you think you are? They give you but it may be that somebody tells you, yes, I have. This is the way I have been thinking.
What's the worst thing that happens if you don't ask the question?
Yeah, and that's the other point behind it there. Like, God forbid that something did happen, and you just felt, I'm not sure whether I'll ask the question or not. Even just the stress on you as a person yourself there, after whether somebody actually attempted suicide or took their own life. But what I would say to you there, don't be afraid to ask the question. But to be honest, in your own local communities, what I would say to people there is that basically, if you get the opportunity, try and see, even through your local GAA club, if you can organise a safe talk course. It's a half a day, but it gives people the skills to open that conversation, have that conversation, and then signpost people to the help and support that they may need at that moment in time. So that's what I would suggest there in relation to.
It's a terrific course. It's free as well.
It's free, yeah, it is. And what I would say is, through your local HSE offices, you should be able to organise it within your own local communities from that perspective there. We'd also say to you there, on the broader spectrum of mental health in general, there's a course out there called Mental Health First Aid. It's run by Mental Health First Aid Ireland, which are part of the St. John of God's Hospital in Stillorgan in Dublin. If you Google them, Mental Health First Aid Ireland, and you can contact them directly. They have funding through the HSE, which also enables them to run courses at no cost within local communities. The only thing that the community would be required to do is provide the actual facilities to run the training. And it's a 2-day training program, but it's broad spectrum on different types of mental health crises, including including suicide. But again, what I would say is, I think it's a life skill that most people should actually try and obtain.
Yeah, I actually took part in that course a number of years ago, and I found it was a tough course. Don't get me wrong, but it was very, very helpful, because I kind of experienced I had to deal with a situation about a year ago, and I was saying to myself, "Thank God I did that course, because at least I was able to manage the situation and stop something from escalating." So it was really, really helpful and beneficial, that type of course.
Paidi, what would you have liked someone to say to you? Or how would you have reacted to someone if they had said, Paidi, are you okay?
Okay, I don't like granted. I think if someone asked me was I suicidal and directly asked me, I think I would have been so taken aback that I probably would have done it. I've done the same talk course as well, and I've actually used it subsequent years. And I think there's a thing in Ireland, you're tiptoeing around. How are you? I'm grand. We're chronically awkward species. And the safe talk training trains you to cut through the bullshit, for lack of a better term. Put the niceties and the awkwardness to one side and be direct. It trains you to do that, because we're not, by nature, good at that.
Paidi, I'm just thinking, you said that, you weren't good at school. My God, you're a great writer.
Actually, I got an A1 in English and English. I dropped down to ordinary level.
Do you think is there too much stigma around, and I'm putting the three of you, do you think there's too much stigma on academically for children to be high achievers within school? Is there too much focus on that?
Nowadays, I don't know. She's a teacher, and it's so different now to when I was in the world. It's supports that are there for struggling or have additional apples and oranges compared, not like for like.
Yeah, well, look, I'm that long out of education that it's very difficult to answer. But I suppose, even as a parent, I would say that probably the leaving cert is very much it's all about points. At the end of the day, it's about getting the best that you can to get the relevant course. Maybe there's absolutely. Have we focused too much on the academic side as opposed to the skills that we need out there? We can see it at the moment. They're we've a housing crisis, and a lot of that is down to the fact that basically we don't have enough people with the skill sets out there to actually, aside from everything else and the other structural issues that are there, but definitely we'd see it from that perspective. And then, the old days where, in my day, was the intercert or the junior cert, and I think it still is the junior cert now at this stage. But that sense behind, you could do an apprenticeship with a junior cert. We see it now. Look, yeah, but I actually, what I've seen is getting access to the actual the apprenticeship system can be difficult unless you have the leaving cert, or for example, you'd also see that sense of just that awareness that if we flip this and say, look at it from education from the perspective that there are many ways that you can actually enter the education system. It doesn't have to be directly through achieving X number of points in your leaving cert. Or, for example, you might go back to education later in life. We see it now that even with apprenticeship schemes where people are starting apprenticeships now in their late 20s, early 30s. So again, that day of the 16 or 17-year-old apprentice, has changed. Or again, if people going back at 25, 26 years of age, maybe to start a primary degree, or going back later to do other training as such. And again, what I would say is, look, education is also key to your health and well-being as well. That sense of lifelong learning. Doesn't matter whether it's flower arranging or it's you're learning how to build the next rocket to the moon.
And also keeping that lifelong learning, it really improves your self-esteem, your self-confidence, and it keeps you where you, again, action.
Yep.
You're not sitting at home sort of dwelling on that negative self-talk. You're out there, and it's also lifelong learning. It gives you the reason to get up out of bed in the morning if you're feeling very low, or low mood, depression. And I think lifelong learning for me, I seem to be lifelong learning since 2003, but I love it. And I think it's also a way of really getting to know yourself, getting to know your strengths, your abilities, your and that competence. A lot of people get mixed up between self-confidence and confidence and competence, and and abilities, and strengths. Sometimes it's also that lifelong learning. You get to know yourself, and you get to know more of who you are. And I think too, it's the most that's part of that self-care. Is starting the most important relationship that we have in life is the relationship we have with ourselves. And we can't, and an awful lot of people, they go externally for that validation. Instead of, if you keep looking for validation outside yourself, you're always going to be dependent on whether you're good enough or anything by someone else, instead of getting the time. The self-care for me would be getting to know myself, liking myself, appreciating myself. And that goes more from, go to the hairdressers, get the makeup on. It goes about, I would say, that breathing technique is when you start to feel your body and you feel alive. You can feel your heart, you can feel yourself, you can hear yourself. And getting out to nature and hearing the birds singing. There's nothing that can change your emotional state. Getting out to nature and wondering the miracle of nature. There's nothing like mother nature to actually really to change your state. But sometimes I often wonder, I have adult children, 33 and 29, and and listening even to their friends, and they go, I have anxiety, and I go, how can teenagers and people in their mid-30s have anxiety? What has happened that people, even with great professional careers, and they go, but I have so much anxiety. And it really concerns me. I grew up in the north during the Troubles. I grew up in Africa, Saudi Arabia. And anxiety wasn't in our vocabulary. So I'm looking and I'm really trying to understand and sort of look around and go, is it coming from the lifestyle? Is it coming from media? And also, I love the health and wellness industry. But I also think, is there a negative side of the health and wellness industry where it becomes an industry instead of a support system? With the narrative. I remember, Paul, we were on the radio, and Paul and I used to have a thing, and you were involved, you were talking about mental health, and I was on the radio.
Yeah.
And I used to say live on air, I disagree with the slogan, it's okay, the mental health slogan, it's okay not to be okay. And I used to say, Paul, no, because everyone has to take personal responsibility and accountability of how they feel and what they think and what they do. It's not okay to not be okay, because that means, for me, you just get deeper and deeper into the emotions and into that emotional state. Whereas I argue with that on air. No, I disagree with that. And we agreed to disagree at the time.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
okay.
No.
Like it's brutal.
Look, absolutely. I'd agree from the perspective saying it's not okay. Everybody else, it's not okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
But I think I got that one right. Okay, but yeah, you know what I mean anyway. But I suppose what I'm trying to say is that, you know, using the statement is very much about breaking down the stigma. That somebody can reach out and say, actually, do you know what? I'm not okay. I need a bit of help here. And very much from that perspective, I would have always seen it as basically what I said, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay not to be okay, and to reach out and look for help.
Yeah, that extra bit.
So if you think of it, so I'm kind of reframing it a little bit from that perspective in relation.
And messaging is very important.
And look, messaging is extremely important. But again, you know, even if we look at, here's 4 of us here sitting today, and we're talking about mental health. Could we have done this 10 years ago?
No.
Well, I'd say we might just have been able to.
We've been whispering.
A little bit. Yeah.
Exactly.
But I think we've managed to open the door there. But I think when we open the door, we also need to be aware that basically we need to ensure that the relevant supports are in place.
Yeah.
At the moment, if we look at the mental health budget within more or less within government itself, it's not ring fenced, and that's probably a big issue there. Look, it doesn't mean that our primary care centres around the country are properly resourced from the point of view full mental health teams. They're not. And again, a lot of that is down to when they need to fill a hole. In one end of the HSE, what do they do? The easy one is probably the mental health budget. They take elements from it. So again, that sense of actually, I suppose, very much lobbying our political representatives from the perspective of saying, actually, you know what, we want you to ensure that you ring fence it, that you ring fence the budget, so basically supports people who are struggling with their mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you made a good point there, Roisin. I think we were chatting before. I suppose the big thing, I suppose, if you want to help your mental health, you do have to take responsibility. You do have to help yourself. You do, but I think if people can feel secure, and if they're secure in themselves, they'll feel more secure in their relationships with their family, their partners, the wider society. So I think by building that resilience and by creating that steady, solid base, so when you think of something is secure, it's not going anywhere. So having your toolkit, Martin, is extremely,
I think that's really important.
Extremely important, and being able to, I think as you said, your breathing and stuff, be more kind of self-aware and self-present, because we are always rushing and racing and kind of thinking, oh, what do I have to do here? And social media, and there is a lot of kind of doom scrolling and stuff like that, and we can get lost in that.
There's a lot of fear mongering, I think, out there.
We can get lost in that.
Yeah.
So
social media is good as well. Look, Martin, you're here today because of social media.
Well, I suppose I'm very much a defence advocate on social media. Yeah. If you more or less check my feed, it's very much around basically our own national security and stuff. But then I come from a military background, so.
And you were in the Bloods, the 3rd Infantry Battalion.
I was in the 3rd Infantry Battalion for 7 years. So I initially trained with them in the Curragh when they were stationed there, and still had a lot of good relationships with the lads here in Stevens Barracks and Kilkenny and the whole lot, and kept those relationships up. So yeah, it's a small world, you know.
And would you say then, like, I'm a great advocate for the Defence Forces. I know I'm biased. My son's in the Defence Forces, but I remember my son. The first week he went in for his training, he came out, and I was always saying, "Stand tall, wear a belt." It took me years. He never wore a belt, and I said, "Wear a belt, walk tall, walk shoulders back." The first week he came home, he was walking tall. He had a belt on. And I said, "Let me check your neck. Are you cloned? How come I've taken all these years for you to do this?" 1 week in the Defence Forces training, the first week, he came out tall, walking tall, wearing a belt. His hair was cut. And I went, but the Defence Forces, they install those principles in of, resilience and positivity and sense of teamwork. And the Defence Forces, I think, for me, even as a mother, oh, for God's sake, will you put a belt on? He came out and instantly. And that brings that respecting the honor of representing your country, the honor that is, but defending your country and protecting the citizens. There's a great honor in that. And you can tell, the proudness of my son. He's completely different persona when he's wearing his uniform and the Defence Force uniform. As I said before we come off air, if I wanted something done, hope he won't listen to this, but if I want something done, I always ask, if I want something done around the house, I wait until he's wearing his uniform and he pops in for lunch or something. "Oh, can you do this for me?" He does it. But there's a sense of, isn't there, there's a sense of dignity and honour in what the Defence Forces installs that into the men and women in the Defence Forces.
Look, absolutely. It's and again, it's an organisation that's based around values.
Yeah.
And it's creating, it's engendering those values more or less in its members. And again, that starts from the day you walk in the gate.
Yeah.
And it's something as simple as wearing the uniform correctly, that your hair is cut. If you're male, that you're cleanly shaven.
Your bed is made.
Your bed is made. There's numerous small little things, but that all feeds into that sense of respect, pride, when you got moral and physical courage.
Yes.
All those particular elements that sit there, that are, I suppose, part of a soldier's life, And when I talk about a soldier, I'm talking about air crew, navy as well here, in that sense behind it. And that sense of I suppose, not alone pride, but a sense that it's almost like a vocation.
Yeah.
In many respects, and we don't have too many vocations left in the country now at this stage. I'm not going to mention any more of them, but that sense behind when you got, like, I did 36 years, so quite a substantial amount of time. But again, did we give out? Did we complain? Absolutely, we did. But if we weren't, there'd be something wrong. But what I would say is, I've great pride in the fact that I had that opportunity. I was given that opportunity to serve my country, both at home and abroad, and probably serving the best unit in the Defence Forces, the Bloods, the 3rd Battalion, which are based here in Kilkenny. And I suppose again, with overseas missions, that sense of connection, that sense of that we're here to do a job that actually has value. But aside from that, that sense of actually, do you know what? That brotherhood, and I mean brotherhood, sisterhood.
Yeah.
That that comes from that connection that I suppose military personnel serving abroad and serving on overseas deployments, gain as part of that particular unique group of people that travel together, soldier together, peacekeep together, and hopefully all return home together as well.
You talk about values, Paidi, and that brought that up. Values, isn't it? If you're looking to change or get out of the sense of depression or suicidal, when you mentioned values there as well, In that church that day, when your uncle and your favourite person was getting married, family values must mean an awful lot to you. So maybe subconsciously, when you were sitting in that church, that sense of value of being there for when your favourite person got married.
100%. I mean, you have to be there for people who are there for you. And
Yeah.
that man was always there for me, so I would feel very attached to him. Yeah, he's a great guy. And
Would you
that was
say
a,
then to everyone else that maybe you didn't know that until a couple of weeks later, or when you went somewhere, that moment was so important to you?
yeah, like I spoke about later on. So that was in 2008. I was extremely suicidal in college at a point, to the point where I actually planned my own funeral, because it was the only bit of control I had in my life, was planning who carried my coffin and who said what at it. And I pictured it. I could picture my friends carrying my coffin, and I could picture my family in the pews in the church in Thomastown carrying my coffin. And I think I said this last week, when I pictured them carrying my coffin, none of them were crying. Which again just shows how manipulative the suicidal mind can be. Because one of the people I actually, a friend of mine, David, who I pictured carrying my coffin, rang me one time, thought something had happened to me, and was very upset, and was very relieved to hear I was okay. But yeah, it's a funny. It's not funny. It's scary how manipulative the mind can be.
Yeah.
That I had no concept of the damage I would have done to my loved ones. I couldn't. I was blind to what I would have left behind. And like I said, I often hear suicide being described as selfish, but I don't think it's selfish. I think that people are not oblivious. People cannot see the turmoil that they will leave behind. They're completely blind to the damage that's going to cause. They're aware people will be sad and upset, but they can't see the turmoil.
Because we believe what we think, and then we think that it's our reality. And really, it's a perception. It's not reality of our lives, but it's our perception. And we do, if our mind, as you said, the manipulative of our mind, we are what we think.
Yeah, like again, April to June. In that shot, I was so caught up in the emotional pain and turmoil I was in that moment in time. I couldn't even see 2 or 3 months down the line to that wedding and all the good times that were bound to come and that would come and that did come. All I could see was the immediate pain and anguish and turmoil. Fucking 2 months later, and I was
all or nothing thinking.
Yeah.
Keep talking. I'm just going to get
Okay. I know in later years when I was depressed, I drank to numb the pain, and that was, I would say to anyone in any sort of emotional turmoil, that alcohol and drugs are not your friend.
No.
They will make it 1,000 times worse. It doesn't numb it; it makes it worse. And I knew this. Like, this is basic common sense I would have thought and said. But when I was in that point, I was like, it's just easier to get drunk. So I would go and get drunk. And I'd chase a high and I'd go partying. And the high never came, but the lows absolutely fucking came. Excuse my language.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I suppose, Paidi, if there were people or viewers out there watching this, what would you, if they are struggling, what would you say to them?
I've been there. It's deeply, deeply fucking unpleasant feeling. But it doesn't have to be. And that old cliche that sounds so fucking stupid, a problem shared is a problem halved. It's actually true. I don't know who's in your immediate circle or in your friend group that you can trust. But I would strongly, strongly urge you, if you can't verbalize it, write it down. Text them, message them on Facebook. But tell someone how you're feeling if you're able to get the words out. Alternatively, contact your doctor because they see it all the time, every day. You're not alone. You're not the only one. Like I said, I've lost count of how many people contacted me over the years to say they felt the same. You're one of many.
Absolutely.
And Paidi, what would you say to, I'm going to ask you, what would you say to two people? What would you say to the young boy in school who was lonely? And then what would you say right now to the young boy that day who went home from school, went to the farm, went to the barn with the rope? So what were the two things you would say to them two young boys, which is you?
The loneliness, Jesus, when I was a young boy in school. Stop trying so hard to fit in. Ironically, when I stopped trying to fit in, I actually ended up fitting in. To the young boy standing on the trailer, wanting to kill himself, suicide note wrote. The world is not ending, and your life shouldn't either. The bad times end and the good times come. There'll be ups and downs, but the good times far outweigh the bad, even though you can't see that right now. You don't need to kill yourself. You don't want to kill yourself. I'm very glad you didn't kill yourself. That's probably what I would say, truth be told.
And Martin, I was going through old diaries the other and notes, and it's funny how you do things subconsciously, you don't know why, but you just do them. And I came across notes, and we're talking about the brain, it can manipulate you. And this is what my notes, and I don't know who I got them from, but I just wrote them down. I cite them, but I'm going to Google it and I'll find out. When you talk about the brain being manipulative, my notes was, your brain is always looking for evidence to confirm what you have told it. So if the story in your mind is saying, things are shit and never working out for me, your brain is going to cherry pick everything in your life that reinforces that. This is why when people start to say things, for example, show me how it gets better, I know it can get better than this. Your brain starts looking for evidence. So it's amazing the power of the thought, and your brain, your mind is just doing its job. Your brain will start to cherry pick the things that you're good at, and that show life has been the capacity to get better. Life has the capacity to get better. Your brain, this is what I like. Your brain, your mind is just doing its job. It's looking for proof to reinforce the reality that you have created for yourself out there. So be intentional about the reality you are creating. And I think it's Dolores Cannon always says, and I say to everyone, you are the script writer, you are the director, you are the producer, you're the casting director, and you're the actor of your life. You can change the script of your self-talk at any moment.
How true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose it's interesting when you talk about that. Our brain will cherry pick.
Yeah.
Our mind will cherry pick. It'll, and I think, look, we're automatically programmed to look for the negative. And why is that the case? It's very much down to survival mechanism. When we were running around the plains of Africa, or we were running around in loincloths that kept us safe. We're worrying, is there a saber-toothed tiger around the next corner or whatever. So absolutely there's that piece there. But what I'd also say to you there is, sometimes when almost those negative thoughts kick in, hunt the evidence. And generally you'll find you can't find the evidence.
Yeah.
So we'll use the term, what do you got, and then hunt the good stuff. Hunt the positives. In other words, what's good about me? What's been good in my life for the past 6 months? What's gone well? Paidi talked about it earlier on. He talked about that sense of, that period leading up to the wedding, and that he couldn't see beyond. But again, I kind of think of from that perspective that very much, and Paidi can, I hope he'll agree with me, that very much that the stress was time bound. It was bound to a specific time, and with help and support, we can move beyond that. It's not a permanency. It's not permanent, and there is help and there is support out there. And again, it's that sense of what you got, what I would say to people, if you're down, don't let it get to the stage where all of a sudden you can't see any hope. Reach out, look for help, use the supports that are out there. Paidi mentioned GP, fantastic, brilliant. Link in with them. If you can't, I know for a fact if I go to see the GP, what I do is I pretty get, and this is not to do with necessarily mental health, it could be to do with just my physical health. I write down the things I want to say so that I'm not walking out saying, do you know what, I forgot to say that, or I forgot to say this.
I do that as well, actually,
Yeah, and it's very useful.
Or you can email your doctor before the appointment. You say, when you're making an appointment, I'm going to email over some questions. So if I forget, or the doctor can see this before my appointment.
Before your appointment. Or it may be that, look, you might want to bring someone with you.
Yeah.
That may be the case. I'd also say to you there is, look, you may not get a GP at the weekend. You may not get a GP at 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening. Also remember that more or less Samaritans is our national listening service. They provide non-judgmental support, and the contact number is 116 123. That's 116 123.
And we'll put that in the description box. And going to your GP, that's an action. Yes. It's not just a thought. It's not just running or good. You're putting, again, that's that proactive mindset.
Yeah.
This is another thing I found in my notes, and it's called the principles of synchronicity. Again, I don't know because it was in my notes, but I'm going to find out, and if I can, I'll put it in the description box. Action is the language of physical reality, not words, not thoughts. Physical actions, the willingness and organizations to get the outcomes. Be intentional of your actions and reality. I thought when I read that, I went, oh, and I actually said, I saw that today, Paul, and I actually stayed up last night. I said, this is going to bug me until I find that.
And if you want to be in the present moment, you need to take action. You want to be secure, you need to take action. You want to change your thoughts, change your emotions. It's all about taking action.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, Paul, like you talk about that sense of taking action. And sometimes, I suppose, when we talk about taking action, we're talking about maybe the big actions.
Yeah.
And that big action could be going to the GP.
Yeah.
But what's the small actions? What's the small wins we can make?
Yeah.
Do you know what? I got out of bed this morning before 10 o'clock. Actually, I did. I was well up before 10 o'clock, by the way.
I could be brushing my teeth.
I brushed my teeth. Yeah. I washed my face. And all of a sudden you're saying, do you know what? I'm making progress here. They might be small steps, but it's a step forward.
I can remember when, during the bad times, mental health wise, that I didn't look after myself, and I mightn't leave the house for 3, 4, 5 days, and I wouldn't look after myself for 3, 4. I mightn't eat very well. I wouldn't shower. I wouldn't shave. I'd look terrible, and it made me feel worse. And when I would get into the shower, force myself to shower or shave, whatever, I felt a small bit better. Even the time, a magical better. But it was an action at that time, a positive action.
And you mentioned there positive action, and I suppose that's key. And I even think back, and I very much the focus is around that sense of mental health and mental well-being. And even with the fact that I come from a mental health background, back in 2012, I got a particular diagnosis, physical diagnosis. Was told, put your affairs in order. blah de blah, the whole lot and everything else. And as a result of that, I underwent chemotherapy and different treatments, which thankfully were successful. However, after the chemotherapy and everything else, my recovery, my physical recovery was going well, but my own mental health, and I didn't see that. Even as someone who who had a background in mental health, I didn't see that, and that awareness. And sometimes we don't see it, but other people did, and other people kicked in those supports. Again, the primary support being my wife, but also colleagues who became aware through my wife what was going on. And I took a little journey. I didn't need medication, thankfully. And my journey was using CBT, or cognitive behavioural therapy, as more or less to take me through that particular struggle that I was having mentally. And again, although I never got an official diagnosis, it was depression that I had. But again, that sense that any one of us can be affected, and it can be as a result of the normal stresses that happen in everyday life, through to getting a physical diagnosis. That awareness behind that. Look, if you do become unwell, sometimes we may not notice it ourselves. It may be somebody else that actually sees what's happening for us, and hopefully they can direct us into supports and services. And there are supports and there are services out there, and don't be afraid to engage and to activate those services.
You talk about depression. I heard something the other day, and it said, now I probably can't do it verbatim. I was looking for it, I wrote it down, and I'll probably find it once we turn off the camera. And it said, depression is where we're preoccupied by either failures or something in the past. Anxiety is being preoccupied about something that could go wrong in the future. Where if we be in the present moment and breathe, and you're talking about breath work and breathing. And so I think it's like, once you, again, with people with long-term depression, find out what the source is, where the depression comes from. And then if it's something's happened in your past, you can't change the past. That's why the present is a gift.
Yep.
And I know that sounds a cliche. Anxiety, you can't predict the future. It's like me when they asked me what was my first thoughts in the morning. I think down to G, and I couldn't predict it, so I was creating anxiety before I even got out of bed in the morning. So it's about being preoccupied with just being in the present moment. And Paidi, it's like for Paul and I, and even Keelan or Chleirigh, my son, we have great teamwork up at the camp centres and everything else. And it was the joy that you bring, and I, for one, and like your mother and everyone else, and Amy and for Martin and Paul, we are just so grateful that, God must have sent your family member down that day. Sometimes you had the guardian angel. You had an earth angel down to stop you from doing that, because possibly your job, you may have a bigger role. When you think you're a plumber, and they say that water is to do with the emotions. And what are you? You're a plumber. And you're talking about emotions. So maybe that earth angel that day was sent because you have something very powerful to do in helping what you're doing now, helping people and getting that message out there that there is life, and life is powerful and meaningful. And I would like to thank you and Martin. But Martin, and I hadn't known, I'm going to say, I thought Martin was from Carlow. I didn't realise Martin was from Dublin, and he travelled all the way down for this event tonight. So Martin, thank you so much for doing that.
You're welcome.
I was so embarrassed when you brought, and I said, I thought you were from Carlow, but Paidi, thank you so much for, being vulnerable and putting that vulnerability into action with intention and purpose. Because that is, you talk about Defence Force, that courage and bravery. You could say you're a soldier,
I'll be honest, this does not make me vulnerable. I have more conversations about mental health now with my friends and work colleagues than I do about soccer because it's so normal now. And it mightn't have been in the past, but it's
But you're given that opportunity, that platform for other people to be vulnerable, to even contact you. You know, we don't really realize, you probably don't realize that you're allowing someone to own up with action and to voice it and verbalize it, that they are vulnerable.
Yeah, like people will be vulnerable initially, and they'll get through it and they'll become more resilient. And what's affecting them now mightn't necessarily affect them in the future, and they might even look back and be like, Jesus, like same as me. Like they might look back and be like, wow, I feel like a different person now. But vulnerability is
part of being human.
Yeah, it is. It is. I don't even know how I know what I want to say, and I haven't got the words. But I don't think, for myself, that mental health is a vulnerability anymore. It's just another part of everyday life.
But it's a vulnerability for someone to acknowledge it, accept it, and verbalize it, and pick up that phone. There's strength in being vulnerable, but not staying in that vulnerable state.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like if this was 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I'd have been incredibly vulnerable having this conversation. But again, there's so much talk, and I've spoken to so many people about it that I don't feel as vulnerable because I've spoken and because I've had those conversations with other people, that it's just a part of everyday life now.
Yes. And life is precious, and I think that's something that we all have to, I think, take into account as well. So we need to cherish important moments like this. This is an important conversation, and I'd like to say thanks to both Martin and Paidi for coming down and chatting to us about mental health. And I think we've gone some way, Roisin, to kind of cracking any stigma that may be there. Things are improving, but stigma, unfortunately, is always there. So any conversation like this, it is important, and I suppose it's important too, as you said, you always spoke about, the empty chair, what life could have been had you not been there. I suppose, we all have important, precious people in our lives, and tell them that they are important, tell them that they're precious, and they do matter, and everybody has something to give and something of value. So I think that's the biggest takeaway I'm taking from this brochure.
I found a great way to destigmatize is that if someone tries to stigmatize, you tell them to go off right away, and they won't be long about fucking trying it again. They won't try it again very quickly.
And Martin, what would be your last word to the audience or anyone listening to this?
My last, I suppose, what I finish up by saying is that, look, sometimes we may not see hope out there, but sometimes other people can hold that hope for us. They can support us and they can direct us in the right direction. And finally, just to say that, look, don't be afraid to reach out. Look for help. If you're struggling, don't allow it get to the stage where you end up with no hope.
And hope is you can give people hope of just being there, not saying anything, just being there, as you said, and be that beacon of light that navigates you through that darkness. Paidi, your last word. We'll leave the last word to you.
Fuck. I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier. If you are struggling or feeling down or depressed or suicidal, what you're going through now is not necessarily your future, and it doesn't have to be. It can get better, and it does get better. Just like I said, you have nothing to lose by looking for help or asking for help or speaking to someone or sharing how you're feeling. and you've everything to lose by not doing it. So I strongly encourage anyone who is in a similar boat to myself to just find somebody to talk to and tell them what you're going through, or tell them even half of what you're going through or how you're feeling. And that's my last word.
And on that note, thank you for taking the time to listen to this video and this interview and this panel discussion with Martin Gillick and Paidi Manning. It's greatly appreciated, and may this be a beacon of light that gives people hope going forward in the future. Until next time.
And I'd like to say thank you for tuning into to this video, and I'd like to say thank you, Roisin, for being a fantastic colleague as always, and coming forward with fantastic concepts like this, which, you know, and facilitating conversations like this. I think it's really important. And if anybody has been affected by any issues that have been covered in this video, we will, in the description box, include links to support organisations. So thank you for taking the time to tune into us here on this podcast.